Thank you for the presentation. Really, really nice. With regards to the cost for the passive house, you mentioned earlier that it's around 8 years.
Yeah, 8
basically
to
recovered.
10 years to recoup the investment, yes.
How realistic is that 8 to 10 years? Because sometimes, as we all know, in this current climate or context of the market with the trades and so on, how realistic is that 8, 10 years, or is it more likely to be something in the range of maybe above 10 years?
Well, if we consider the increase of energy cost that we had in the last few years, it's more likely to be less than more. Because the goal in passive house is having a standard that it limits your energy use. So obviously, if we have a big increase in cost in the energy, that is not going to impact much passive house. It's actually going to make it better because the gap between traditional construction and passive house is going to shorten because you recoup much faster what you are spending in advance. Makes sense?
Yes, it does. With regards to the grants available, because I know there currently is a scheme in place for the heat pumps.
Yes.
Are there any others, like for glazing or for installation, not the loft one, I would assume?
So at the moment on new build, no, that I know of, unless they're coming out soon. Maybe Adam can step in if he knows about something like that.
And for
But
retrofit?
I know there is a scheme for retrofitting for any measure that you do on energy improvement of your existing building. You have a discount of so every material, every labor regarding that is 0 VAT rated.
How can we apply for it, or is there?
It is on retrofit.
Details for the schemes.
It is on retrofitting. I don't know exactly how it works because we always advise to get a VAT advisor on that because it's easy to make mistakes. But I know what it includes. So if you are going to add insulation to your home, that is included. If you are digging a trench for your heat pump, that is included. If you're installing a heat pump or PV panels, the VAT is always 0.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just to add something to what Jessica said as well, because it was quite interesting that you said that the cost to build is around 8 to 10% higher, and then you recoup it in 8 to 10 years. It's quite interesting because I do bits with net zero houses and low construction and low carbon construction, and that's about probably anywhere between 5 and 11% higher in cost, but because it depends on how big the scheme is as well, as Jessica said. But that takes 10 to 12, maybe 15 years to recoup because the standard is not as high. So it's quite interesting to see that there is a sliding scale where it may cost on the higher end to build up front, but then you will recoup it a third faster, if you like, which is quite good to know.
Yeah, because so the difference between passive house and any other net zero homes or low carbon homes is that all those, they don't have a standard set of energy use and heating demand, because you can call it zero home a home that they use energy demand, but it produces as much energy. That is called a zero home, but
Yeah.
it might be using way more energy than a passive house uses it. And because by doing all that, it might cost you a lot more money because you need a bigger heat pump, you need more, you need a bigger system, and the maintenance of those are higher. That's the big difference.
That's a question. How does that relate to EPC, or is that something completely different?
It is hard. It is hard to compare it because the calculation are done in a very different way, but you know, before actually sometimes pacifiers might come out as the EPC-B. That tells you a lot how EPC is not a good tool.
Regarding retrofits, so I'm thinking about a typical British house, right? So brick construction or stone for solid walls, right? So you said you're going to improve the fabric, which is walls and windows, right? And I guess the roof. But to retrofit, if you go to brick construction, most of Britain are like that, right? And a lot of them are solid walls. To retrofit that is really expensive, right?
Yeah.
And add insulation is really expensive. So is there any ways around that, or any people?
You mean that if there is a way around it not to put in insulation?
Or the best way of doing it really is it
the best way is putting insulation.
I know, that's right. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So standard.
So now, the problem is not to put insulation. I don't find it putting insulation that much expensive if you think that you're gonna spend that money in heating, and the money that you spend in heating is just you throwing out of the window, because you can't recoup this money that you spend in your heating system, you know, in your gas and your electricity to heat your home. But the money that you spend on your insulation, they stay with you. It's become a part of your asset.
So that covers actually 2 questions actually. Then I got a bit about a lot of British houses are very leaky. It's a big thing about, isn't it, the amount of air, you know, changes. And British houses are so leaky over there. The way they're built, even new houses are so leaky. Are there any techniques that you've got just to you know, to prevent that?
So first of all, as I was saying in the presentation, if we look at modern building only, because obviously if we think about older buildings, they are definitely very much leaky and they don't have a lot of insulation. But let's just think about the modern buildings. Modern buildings have got improved insulation, okay? The 47% of the heat loss goes through air leakage. It means that although we have put insulation, we're still losing 47% of the heat through air leakage because they are not airtight. How do we improve that? So ideally, we would like building regulation to be more stricter on that, but that is a long way, it seems like it.
Yeah.
In Ireland, for instance, they are already much stricter than 8 air changes per hour that we got over here. There are different techniques that you can use. There are air tightness membrane. There are paints. There is a purple paint called, which is an air tightening paint that you can put on bricks. So that is something actually that can respond to your question maybe without adding insulation, but you're still gonna need to remove
because things like, for example, on a house, if you do some rewiring, right, where you got a normal like electrical box on the wall, like a switch or a socket, if you take one off, it's often a gale going through it because there's a plasterboard, there's a gap between there and the brickwork.
So
ideally,
ideally, when you retrofit or you do a new build in passive house, you have it's called an air tightness strategy in place. So you plan very carefully where you put your air tightness layer to make sure that it's always continuous, and also you normally create a service void between the air tightness layer and the finish layer on the inside. This way you can change the plasterboarding and the wiring and the piping all the times that you want without touching the air tightness layer. And this is the only way you can avoid to compromise the big job that you've done up front and make it last for, you know, a lifetime.
I get it. Thanks for that. And the question I had regarding condensation, if you've got less air changes, in a house, how do you manage condensation? Because I guess if you think about rented houses, you know, how do you manage that?
So
I was about to ask that as well.
Because a Victorian house It was designed to have airflow going through, under the floor. There was a cross ventilation. There was chimneys that were allowing it. It was built with leaks, and it was performing just fine with leaks. Now, all of a sudden, we want to put insulation, and we want to, reduce the heat loss, which is absolutely fine, but it needs to be done correctly. So normally, to be completely sure what we're doing, ideally you will want to put adequate ventilation, which means adding maybe a small unit with mechanical ventilation and heat recovery. That will help to solve the problem, because when you create condensation and mold, it's because you haven't got adequate ventilation. So you either need to keep the windows open all the time, or you need to put mechanical ventilation, one of the two.
So if you get mechanical ventilation, so you've got a nice house where it's very, very, no leakage, no air escape, let's say, okay?
Yeah.
And in your loft, you'll have a mechanical ventilation system. How do you then pull air? Because I'm thinking about, if you've got a series of doors and rooms, how do you make sure you get air circulating in the house? Do you need vents somewhere? How does that work?
So the mechanical ventilation works, especially with the heat recovery unit. It works. There is one unit, and then you have piping that goes around each room. And then the extract areas are normally the bathroom, kitchens, utilities where you produce heat. So that will extract the heat. And then the supply air will be bedrooms, dining room, living room, all these rooms where you normally relax. So you're going to have small nozzles, but you don't even see them. And the airflow is so low that you don't even hear it.
So that's designed in, because you can't do afterwards. When you do the house design, that's built in. So you've got voids to design the.
Yeah, but it can be applied, it can be applied also on retrofit if it's a deep retrofit. You can, sure. I'm doing one in London right now. So so it can be done there, or other ways to do it is maybe to choose some areas where you want a mechanical ventilation. You can have those single room units, which it will look like a big vent on your wall, and that will help a lot.
Okay, thank you. And that's regarding heating. So you mentioned solar panels and heat pumps, yeah?
Yeah.
Obviously, heat pumps can be either ground source or air source. The technology is developing all the time. The solar panels, obviously, summertime they're great, but this time of year, not so good. So how do you balance up between heat pumps and solar panels? Is there a calculation around that?
Well, I obviously I don't design those systems, but I work with those systems. So I can only, my answer can only go to a certain level of. But obviously, it is true that we produce less energy through PV panels over the winter, but it doesn't mean that we don't produce them at all. And the good thing about the heat pump, as I was mentioning before, it is that they are a very efficient way to produce heating, because that we don't have any other system that I know of that you introduce 1 kilowatt of energy and it gives you 3 kilowatts of energy. That is simple as that, because a combi boiler last generation is only 96% efficient, when a heat pump is 300-400% efficient. So there is a huge gap between them. So even though it might be sound that electricity costs more and you produce less energy with your PV panels in the winter, I don't think that will be such a big issue. And also, if you not stay at home during the day, I would say invest money in a battery, so you can recharge the battery during the day and use that energy when you need to.
Cool. And then regarding heating, for the heat pump, do you recommend radiators or heating on the floor? What is there a preferred method?
a heat pump work on lower temperature than a boiler. So ideally, not ideally, there's not an ideally really. There is, so they work really well with underfloor heating, because underfloor heating works well with lower temperatures. So that is a good match, but nothing stop you to say, I want to put an air-to-air heat pump and having ventilation system that does my conditioning in my home and everything on air, which is, if the house air tightness is pretty good, it's quite comfortable, because you can feel the heating right away, instead of a water system where you have to wait a little bit to feel the benefit of it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. That's more or less it, actually.
But if I can add, with passive house, considering that the energy demand, the heating demand is so low, it does, there is a house that they are building in Waiopido, and they only put an electric radiator for the whole house.
Wow.
Because you need to think the heat loss is going to be very minimal. And they're going to have mechanical ventilation around the house. And the mechanical ventilation is already balancing and distributing the heat around the house. So your heating system will be really little used. So even when you put underfloor heating, you have in mind maybe those pipes really tight next to each other in a normal heating system. You don't need all that in passive house. You just need the bare minimum.
Okay. Thank you. Last thing is about grants, actually, grants and subsidies. They're still available, are they?
Sorry?
They changed, but grants and subsidies. So often they change. There's schemes coming and going.
It's something that you need to keep watching. Like the other day, I was talking about with someone regarding mortgage. The lenders, they maybe are not willing to invest in this sort of things. Well, there are green mortgages advisors. They lend out green mortgages. They know all this. They have competitive rates now. So the market is changing. It's just many people, I think, are refusing to look into that.
Okay.
Yeah, I would like to know more about through a case study to see how it works, particularly thinking about the retrofits, because that's probably more the area that I would have experience in rather than a new build.
I can tell, Catherine, I can tell that we have put an application in for a site in Pershore. Is a family home. The owners want to undergo a deep retrofit into NFIT standard. Yeah. Once we start building it, we're going to do open days. And you're going to be able to come and see it. I'm going to be there. I'm going to show around. It's going to be very interesting. Normally the open days are in June and in November, because they do those. They do like passive house open days all around the world on the same day, which is quite nice. So yes, I will let you know when these days happens, but it should be this June.
Yeah. Is there a minimum price of house that people, tend to, you're working in the Cotswolds, so do people tend to go, okay, well, my house currently is valued at, I don't know, $500,000, so it would be worth the investment, versus my house is, a small terrace in not greatest area, so it's not worth it? Is there that sort of consideration that people are putting on it?
So when it comes to passive house, a lot of things depend. So if it's a small terrace house and is your forever home and you're going to stay there at least 10 years, I would say absolutely worth it.
It's worth it. Okay.
If it's something that you think you're going to do a quick return, probably that's not the case. It doesn't mean though that you cannot do other things to make it more energy efficient. It doesn't
So
have to be to
take
pass it,
steps towards it.
if we're talking about retrofitting, we have
Mm.
different levels of retrofit certification, if you wish, because you don't have even to have the certification. But let's say, so if Enefit is the gold standard, then below that you have the low energy buildings standard, which is still a passive house standard, but it's less stricter than an Enefit, because let's face it, we cannot really promise to reach the Enefit standard on an existing building, because by the time you go around, you might find the challenges that you couldn't see before, and you might not be able to reach Enefit standard. That happens, okay? So it is part of the game, if you wish. So, but you can definitely achieve the low energy standard. Then there is another one that's called Carbon Light, which is even less strict than that. Still wants 2 air changes per hour for air tightness, but is less strict than Enefit. And that's still achievable. That's still a certification. That still gives value to the property. And moving forward, I don't see why this shouldn't. It is already. If you think about the market value of those property, it is already become part of the asset.
Yeah. No, it's really thought provoking. So thinking about an HMO, I might take it back to brick, renovate a large part of it, and it would be worth putting that in, because that brings the overall costs down for running it.
It
so
is.
You in theory can have more profit
exactly.
on per room, but you've got to be in it for the long term.
Yeah.
So very interesting proposition. Ideas whirring. So in your services, do you go out and assess houses and give a sort of recommendation of works? How does it work from your perspective, or to sort of take a first step towards something?
It depends obviously on the client's requirements. So we cover the service from the very first concept design to project managing the design and construction details and handover, or we can do bits. Depends. We always tailor our service of what the clients need. But yes, definitely we can also visit a property and say, this is what we think we need to do and what we can do. Yeah.
Okay.
One thing to ask that, I'm thinking about commercial conversion, right? Well, often they don't work for that reason, right? But if you take an old office or whatever it is, let's say offices that are built, Victorian times, if you can then do your techniques to upgrade it, there's an argument to say, actually, we're not going to flatten it, we're going to maintain the embodied carbon. It's just another trick or so. For planners, it may be another way to leverage it, to get planners to accept it, because it ticks a box, doesn't it?
I don't want. It might be nice if Adam replied to this, but I'm sure that on a planning point of view, maintaining something that it was been there for a while is part of the heritage is much better than rebuild something new, unless it's something totally outside of the
Yeah, I mean the whole idea of design is to conserve or enhance. And so if you're going to take something down and put something new there, it's got to be as good or better than whatever was there before. Whereas if you are retrofitting an existing building, you are conserving whatever's there, and then anything that you're doing inside would be seen as a sustainability benefit. So it just depends how far are you willing to go with your new design. If you're willing to go the whole, I'm interested, James, was the building you saw last week the M&S on Oxford Street?
It was that one.
Yeah,
yes, that's the one.
So that's quite an interesting one, because that was recommended for approval by one of the country's most experienced planning inspectorates, and it had everything ready for approval, including respect to the character of the area and sustainability. But they had to go a very, very, very long and expensive way to get that. And it's that sort of size of scheme is you're much more looking at the 40 to 80 year mark of when you can recoup your costs for development. So, but then that was already, it was meant to be allowed the first time, but it was just a sort of conservative voting thing at the time, and that's why it's sailed through this time. But yeah, as Jessica said, for the vast majority of cases where they're a commercial conversion for the upper floors on a high street or wherever it might be for commercial to resi, whatever you're able to do maintaining the existing buildings, so long as you're able to tick your planning boxes, and then probably more importantly, the building reg ones. So making sure that your windows are ticking the right boxes, because a lot of those old office buildings don't hit building regs and then coming in. But all of that stuff is great. And it definitely makes it cheaper than knocking a building down.